evening, honourable members. Please be seated.
Under Government Bills and Orders for second reading, Bill 24, Miscellaneous Statutes Amendment Act 2022, the Honourable Mr. Nixon.
The Honourable Associate Minister of Mental Health and Addiction.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I am pleased to rise on behalf of the Government House Leader today to move second reading of Bill 24, the Miscellaneous Statutes Amendment Act 2022. The Miscellaneous Statutes Amendment Act improves clarity in our laws, Madam Speaker. It allows lawmakers to make minor changes in the law and to correct anomalies, inconsistencies, outdated terminology, and errors to provide clarification in provincial law, Madam Speaker. This bill would make minor amendments to 19 acts, which include, I'm going to ask to make sure the House is aware of all 19 of these acts, so bear with me, everyone. The Dairy Industry Act, the Family and Community Support Services Act, the Health Professions Act, the International Trade and Investment Agreements Implementation Act, the Interpretation Act, Legislative Assembly Act, Marketing and Agricultural Marketing and Agricultural Products Act, the Marriage Act, the Métis Settlement Act, the Occupational Health and Safety Act, the Personal Information Protection Act, and the Post-Secondary Learning Act, as well as the Queen Elizabeth II Platinum Jubilee Recognition Act, the Recall Act, the Safety Codes Act, the Skills Trades and Apprenticeship Education Act, the Societies Act, the Surface Rights Act, and finally, Madam Speaker, the Vital Statistics Act. Thank you very much. Madam Speaker, while all of these amendments are minor in nature, you want to repeat that? They would add clarity and consistency to our laws, so thank you, Madam Speaker, very much.
There are others to join the debate. The Honourable Member for Edmonton Millwoods.
Thank you very much. Just on behalf of the official opposition, we appreciated the government working with us on this particular piece, and we are pleased to support Miscellaneous Statutes Act.
Would the Honourable Minister like to close debate? Seeing none. The Honourable Associate Minister of Mental Health and Addiction has, on behalf of the Honourable Government House Leader, has moved second reading of Bill 24, the Miscellaneous Statutes Amendment Act 2022. Does the Assembly agree to the motion for second reading? All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. That is carried.
Bill 24, Miscellaneous Statutes Amendment Act 2022 is now read a second time. Committee of the Whole.
Members, I'd like to call Committee of the Whole to order. Committee of the Whole has under consideration Bill 10, the Health Professions Protecting Women and Girls Amendment Act 2022. This is Bill 10's first time in Committee of the Whole. Other members wishing to join the debate? Seeing none. The Honourable Member for Edmonton Highlands Norwood.
Sorry, I thought the lovely member across the way, but maybe we'll be hearing from her shortly, so I shouldn't assume. So it is an honor to rise, and in fact, oh, amazing! It feels like it's actually been a little while since I've spoken in the chamber, and so I don't want to presuppose anything, but I may not have a whole lot more opportunities to do so. And as I like to do the first time when I speak in the chamber, just acknowledge, we had the opportunity earlier today, many of my colleagues and I, to stand in support of paid sick days outside of the legislature. And there was a really good rally, and it was an important reminder of the fact that we are still, in a pandemic, and we, as legislators, should acknowledge the fact that, the pandemic has laid bare many of the challenges that healthcare workers have seen, and many of the gaps in our healthcare system. And so, shout out to all those workers on the front lines, and not just in healthcare, but in education, in retail, and anywhere on the front lines. And so I will just speak briefly tonight to Bill 10. I did have the chance to speak to Bill 10 in, I believe it was it would have been in second, and it feels like a while ago now. Time is awfully confusing here, both inside and outside the chamber. And, I said then, and I'll restate a few of my remarks, I said then that, we absolutely, on this side of the House, believe that, female genital mutilation, the intent of this bill is an important one. And I appreciate very much that the member from Chestermere Strathmore has, had a number of conversations on this bill, and I know that she took some of the questions and comments that I had for her. Mostly, I think, actually offline. We mostly spoke outside the chamber, and I know that she did take some of that feedback to heart. And so, I did want, if she's willing to talk a little bit to the bill today, I did just want to ask a little bit more around the consultation piece on the bill. And so, one of the things that I don't want to say I struggled with, but that I questioned is just that, it's not, I believe, and the member can correct me, but I believe she said, at least it was in a media report, that there were no cases reported of FGM here in Alberta, something to that effect. And so I guess my question is, who did you consult with on this? What made this be a priority piece of legislation for this government? And I want to frame this, positively, because as I shared in second when I spoke to this bill, I remember when I was a high school social studies teacher in rural Alberta, I remember this was actually one of the human rights abuses that we talked about, and we I know one of my students even did a bit of their presentation on this topic, and so it's something that a lot of people don't necessarily know is happening globally. However, again, I would love to learn a little bit more about the Alberta context and why it is that and again, I want to frame this not as criticism, but just as questions. There are so many issues facing women and gender diverse folks in this province, and I think, I've said this, and again, I know I'm a broken record. I want to not frame this as criticism, but I've talked to a lot of women and a lot of folks across this province. I do every day, and I'm proud of that. And this, quite honestly, this is not an issue that I've heard to be a concern. I've heard a whole heck of a lot of issues, particularly surrounding women's health, and I think that was something that we'd said in our early comments on this bill as well. When we heard that there was something coming to do with women's health, I was intrigued to see what it would be, and I was a little bit surprised that there wouldn't be, perhaps something that would address the challenges that women and gender diverse folks experience when accessing obstetrical care, as an example, across this province. We know countless communities, I know my colleague from Edmonton City Centre has named a whole bunch of them, where women and folks who need those services are not able to access them. I mean, maybe that couldn't be addressed through legislation, but it could certainly be addressed through tangible action by this government. That's one example. Another example I see, I note the Minister for Status of Women, she mentioned this as well, just talking about something I'd talked about back in, I think March was into, time is confusing, Endometriosis Awareness Month, right? That's an issue that, I'll be honest with you, I didn't know enough about until I met with some women and some folks who struggle with it, and just hearing how incredibly debilitating that women's health issue is, right? So my questions, I guess, primarily for either the Minister for Status of Women or the member from Chestermere Strathmore would be to just talk a little bit about the consultation process, what led this to be a bill that would be a priority of this government. I said it multiple times in this chamber in this session. You know, this government had an opportunity with so many pieces of their legislation to really make transformational change. A great example would be the Continuing Care Act. I believe that's Bill 11. You know, the pandemic has really exposed some of the huge gaps in the continuing care system. What an opportunity for this government to be leaders and to try to really address some of those challenges. Nope. Instead, they presented a piece of legislation that's very much mostly housekeeping changes, administrative changes, right? And we saw that with a number of other pieces of legislation this session. And I think there are members, no doubt, on both sides of this chamber that would question, you know, the seriousness or the gravity of the pieces of legislation that came forward this session. And so with that, again, I want to make it very clear that, you know, we are, you know, in support of this bill, and we're in support of having these sorts of difficult conversations, and we all want to be in this chamber, I'm certain, leaders when it comes to standing up against human rights abuses such as FGM. But I still do have a few questions. So I'm hoping that we can get a few answers from that side of the House. Thank you, Madam Chair.
The Honourable Member for Chestermere Strathmore.
Thank you. And thank you so much to the member across the way for the questions, really great questions, actually. One of the most transformational things that happens in this place is actually being able to bring pieces of legislation like this that elevate many of the things, many of the topics that the member actually spoke about. In my lifetime, especially coming from, I'm part of a very beautiful culture on one side, from the Southeast Asian culture. And I'm very lucky, there's so many beautiful things about my culture, but there's also things that are call into question the equality and equity for girls and women. A lot of the legislation that we bring through this House, and I think that the opposition could equally agree, not only come from the people that we speak to, but elevate and elevate the discourse around many, many discussions. And when we're talking about sexual assault, domestic violence, and in this particular case, FGM stems from many discussions around child marriage and honor beatings and honor killings and situations that still occur. And just to add some clarity, Madam Chair, for the member across the way, we are coming into something called the cutting season. Now, the cutting season is something that happens in other countries, whereby they call it vacation cutting. And because we don't necessarily know, because you can imagine the cutting of the clitoris, the sewing of the labia, and all of the assorted practices that go along with this, it's not something that one would speak about under normal. And I think about so many things that I've learned, and the member had talked about this under other situations regarding surgeries and transformational changes that happen. A lot of the things that we talk about in this House, Madam Chair, a lot of us don't have a lot of information about. And we wouldn't have been able to learn about those things or start the process of education had we not had the opportunity and the privilege to be able to bring those things before the House. Anytime we can save any little girl from any situation, especially in Canada. In Canada, we believe we are a country that believes in the safety and security of girls and women. We say that when people enter our borders. We tell people that when they come to Canada that their daughters will be safe. However, with a practice like this, and I'd also like to just mention that this legislation is not led by Western philosophy. It is led by the diasporas around the world that are changing. They are changing the world for their girls in countries where millions, 200 and some million girls have been cut and have lost babies or have died as a result of having labor with closure of the labia minora. In Africa, there is a report that is called the Maputo Protocol. The Maputo Protocol is a protocol across Africa that is about protecting and promoting the rights of women and girls across Africa. The Maputo Protocol in Section 14 talks about women's rights over their body and reproduction rights and many, many things that are very important to all of us in this House and in Canada. But the most important piece about that protocol is what they're doing across the diaspora and through Africa to help elevate the rights of girls and women. The language and everything that is in this bill that has been used, and you'd asked about consultation. I'm not sure to the MLA if we had actually sent this list of consultations. I'm happy to share that with you, but if you don't mind, I'll read you, like, it's 2 pages long of consultation.
share.
And I'm happy to share, sorry if that's a prop. I apologize, Madam Chair.
No, just speak through the chair.
But I won't go through the entire list. But I'm very happy to share, yeah, and I can send it over to you if you like. Okay. Yes, okay, thank you, Madam Chair. But just to give you one thing I wanted to actually talk about with the member, through you, Madam Chair, is that we'd actually had some interesting conversations with folks after the legislation came forward. Some of the colleges had actually reached out to us to go, why are we doing this and how does this impact us? And the conversations that we had were so amazing because we were able to explain what the situation was, and knowing that a lot of these colleges are dealing with new Canadians and the ability to have an open conversation, because quite often the colleges are the people that are working with these folks that already have really, really solid protocols for sexual assault and domestic violence and many other things, are able to have another tool in their toolkit should they hear something about this. And imagine if under the circumstances that they had heard through their discussions that they're having with folks, that this situation was occurring. And the ability not only to help a little girl, but even to help a family in this situation. So I think that, and the member was also had mentioned about the opportunities of other legislation coming forward. There's a lot of transformative legislation that can happen in this place. But until we start these difficult conversations and are willing to actually have it within this space, it's difficult for all of us, and we all come from very different places with a lot of really important things that need to be spoken about. And the member had spoken about that with the LGBTQ2S+ community and transformational change that has to happen in there, the gender reaffirming surgeries that we had actually spoken about, which is super important. And we just want to make sure that all of that important work has its place to be able to talk about that, and that we're talking about little girls that are having an action put against them that is against their will in this country. And when they are sent overseas to have this procedure done, the incredible amount of medical situations that can occur to their little bodies as they grow and have to deal with this. And on top of that, supports for survivors and potentially help to have reconstructive surgery when needed in order to be able to put their perfect bodies back the way they wanted them, if that's what they choose to do. So I'm trying to remember the other questions that were asked. I apologize, I did write some of them down. But I wanted to also say, the member had mentioned about the seriousness and the gravity. I think that suggesting that one situation has more seriousness and gravity than another one puts us into a situation where we're choosing. And I think all of the discussions that we're having in here as a result of this discussion show the seriousness and gravity of how it is that we protect our public, and how we as a legislature, when we say we're going to protect girls and women, that we're going to protect girls and women. So if I may say, I've met hundreds of women in this province. Was the actual procedure done in Alberta? Not as far as we know. Are procedures being done in North America? Yes, they are. And in fact, in the United States, because federal legislation was only available and state legislation was not available, girls were continuing to be cut in places like Michigan because the federal legislation and the state legislation didn't align. I also wanted to mention the many networks that are organizing around the world globally to end this practice. Again, just to reinforce that this isn't us as a Western culture trying to impose our ideas onto a different culture. This has been led completely by the cultures that are trying to change and alter the way that girls are being treated. And you can imagine, just to put yourself into a situation for a moment in a different country whereby your value is being measured over whether you will be promiscuous or dirty. And those are the languages that are used when a girl's not cut or sewn up. This isn't in any way to point fingers at anybody. This is thousands of years of cultural practice that has come into play that has determined the go forward. And that girl that is going to a different group, going to a different family, her value is increased because she has been cut and everything that goes along with that facilitation of her marrying into, the neighboring family or whatever that is about elevating her value. Imagine if we as a Western nation are able to help our counterparts across the world to show what the value of a girl is and find other ways to show coming of age and opportunities to really develop how it is that we treat girls and how it is that we see that development and the importance of their development and who they are and that we do not need to alter them for them to be clean or not promiscuous. And those are just a couple of those things. Imagine for a moment the labia minora being sewn up and that there's only a tiny little hole for a girl to menstruate and urinate through. And then on top of that, you add in the aspect of intercourse or anything like that when she's of age and she gets married and what that's like for that person. And then you add on top of that, she gets pregnant and delivers a baby and has to be opened and then sewn shut again. It doesn't need to happen here, and we don't need to know a direct example of that to not know that it's not happening and that there aren't girls and women who are impacted by that. We know that. We've talked to the doctors, we've talked to the organizations, we know that this is happening. We just don't know how to prevent it yet. And so this legislation is enabling legislation to help all of us learn a little bit more about how we can be there for our people. Whether you're a person who just got off the airplane yesterday and are starting your life in Canada and hopefully Alberta, or if you've been here for 7, 8, 10 generations. One of the things that was very profound for me that I read, there's an organization called Our Daughters. And in that, one of the women, her name is Irfan, and Ifra started this organization. And the entire mandate is, let's make sure that our daughters don't suffer the way that we did. And again, it is led by the associations and the women, these powerful women in cultures who are coming forward to defend their daughters. I think that as a multicultural society, a beautiful province that wants to fling her doors open to everybody and anybody who wants to come here and be successful, that not only do we look at healthcare, we have to look at racism, we have to look at bigotry, we have to look at the way that women are marginalized in the system. We have to look at so many different things. But if we have the tools to be able to make ourselves better and to understand it and to be able to ask the questions. One of the doctors that I spoke to, oh gosh, this is going back 4.5 years ago, had mentioned that they had seen several women that actually had been altered. And if you can imagine, they were able to ask questions about abuse, like ligature marks and other things that are on women's bodies if they've had gone through physical abuse. They were able to ask questions about that, but they were not comfortable asking about an alteration of the labia or a cut of the clitoris because they didn't know how to ask the question. These are our professionals who probably have every conversation imaginable with a person when they're on the table. But they were terrified to ask the question too because they didn't want to be offensive or talk about something that they didn't know about. So we need and have responsibility because we know that this is happening to make sure that we have the opportunity to educate people. And if it's one girl or if it's 10,000 girls, it doesn't matter. What matters is that we elevate the discussion around that protection, and that will lead to other legislation, some of what the member was talking about, which I think is really important, but also around other cultural practices that countries are trying desperately to end, like child marriage, like honor beatings, and like honor killings. And I wish that I could tell you that I hadn't had experience with that in my own families, but unfortunately, like most families, we have history in our own of these kinds of behaviors. So it's very, very personal for me, and it's really, really important that as a person from Southeast Asian background that I'm able to share these experiences with you, and that we can pass legislation that I think will elevate all of us and hopefully lead to other pieces of legislation that are equally transformational and and that understand the seriousness and the gravity of all of the things that we're dealing with. Thank you so much.
Are there others wishing to join the debate? Seeing none, I will call the question. That's fallen. Sorry. On Bill 10, the Health Professions Protecting Women and Girls Amendment Act 2022. 2022. On the clauses of the bill, are you agreed? Any opposed? Carried. On title and preamble, are you agreed? Any opposed? Carried. Shall the bill be reported? Are you agreed? Any opposed? Carried. Oh, here, I'll set that one up and I'll sign it. Honorable members, we are on Bill 24, the Miscellaneous Statutes Amendment Act 2022. In Committee of the Whole, other members wishing to speak? Seeing none, I will call the question on Bill 24, the Miscellaneous Statutes Amendment Act 2022. On the clauses of the bill, are you agreed? Any opposed? Carried. On title and preamble, are you agreed? Any opposed? It's carried. Shall the bill be reported? Are you agreed? Any opposed? That is carried. Bill PR2, the Calgary Heritage Authority Amendment Act 2022. Are there speakers to the bill? Seeing the honourable member from Timilwoods.
Thank you. We are discussing PR2 in Committee of the Whole, and I stand in support of PR2, something that we know that is supported by the City of Calgary Ministry of Municipal Affairs. But I was also thinking that this was a bill that would be amended as was recommended by the committee, and an amendment to PR2 I think would follow the recommendations of the committee and improve this piece of legislation. Specifically, I believe we're looking for an amendment that would address liability of the authority with respect to loss or damage. But having said that, with that amendment, this particular piece of legislation is really going to make some very straightforward changes to change the legal name of the Calgary Heritage Authority to Heritage Calgary, to clarify the definition of heritage resources and the activities of the authority, and to modernize its governance framework. And as I mentioned again, there is agreement between the stakeholders involved, as well as support from the City of Calgary and the Ministry of Municipal Affairs. This piece of legislation will also, through various sections, change some of the definitions, including adding the words director, executive director, inventory of evaluated historical resources, board, and expand the concept of heritage resource with specific categories of items to be included, such as buildings, historical landscapes, culturally significant areas. And so I want to thank the committee that reviewed PR2, as well as the petitioner, the general manager on behalf of what is currently Calgary Heritage Authority, for bringing this forward. This piece of legislation was discussed at the committee, and I'm very pleased that all parties are in support of it, particularly with the one amendment that will improve this piece of legislation. So, on behalf of the official opposition, very pleased to have spoken briefly to this PR2.
The honourable member for Calgary, Klein.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the honourable opposition House leader for her great remarks. I appreciate that. So, I'd like to rise now and move an amendment. Would you like?
I would like your copies.
Okay.
And the original.
There you go.
This will be known as Amendment A1. Honourable member, please proceed.
Perfect. Thank you, Madam Chair. Essentially, the amendment I'm moving on PR2 is to clarify the extent of the authority's limitation of liability, as important to ensure that petitioners are not being granted powers or rights that would be extraordinary when compared to what is provided to other entities under the public law of Alberta. Some of the parts of subsection 2 limit the liability of directors in relation to the authority. Others, however, relate to liability of directors in dealing with third parties. So from a legal standpoint, it is important to ensure that organizations are not entirely limited from liability. Otherwise, their acts, omissions, even if caused through an employee or director, could result in significant damage, loss, or injury to a third party that has no legal recourse or to be compensated. So with that, I move this amendment. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Are there others to speak to the amendment? Seeing none, I will call the question on Amendment A1 as moved by the Honourable Member for Calgary Klein. All those in favour, please say aye. Any opposed, please say no. That is carried. Are there any members wishing to speak to the bill as amended? The Honourable Member for Calgary Buffalo.
Thank you very much. Just briefly, Madam Chair, I certainly agree with the comments made by my colleague on this side just a few minutes ago. The General Manager certainly know that person and believe that the petition to make the changes that are identified here will assist in the not only governance but ultimately I believe in the protection of important historical resources in Calgary, something that many people in Calgary believe not enough protection goes on. I know that there has to be some remuneration to property owners if this action is taken, but not if the provincial government takes the action. In any event, the City of Calgary will be better served by a more streamlined and better functioning entity, and certainly want to support that happening not only for the protection of built structures, but other significant structures in the Calgary area. Thank you.
Any other members wishing to speak? If not, I will call the question on Bill on the amendment. My apologies. We vote on the amendment. We voted the amendment. We voted on the amendment. Yeah, we're voting on the bill. Agreed? Okay. On Bill PR2, the Calgary Heritage Authority Amendment Act 2022, on the remaining clauses of the bill. Are you agreed? Any opposed? Carried. On title and preamble. Are you agreed? Any opposed? Carried. Shall the bill be reported? Are you agreed? Any opposed? Carried. The Honourable Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that the Committee of the Whole rise and report Bill 10, Bill 24, and Bill PR2.
Having heard that motion, all those in favour, please say aye. Any opposed, please say no. That is carried. We shall now rise and report. The Honourable Member for Berks Medicine Hat.
Madam Speaker, the Committee of the Whole has had under consideration certain bills. The committee reports the following bills, Bill 10 and Bill 24. The committee reports the following bill with some amendments, Bill PR2. Madam Speaker, I wish to table copies of amendments considered by Committee of the Whole on this date for the official records of the Assembly.
Does the Assembly concur in the report? All those in favour, please say aye. Any opposed, please say no. That is carried.
Under government bills, or under private bills for third reading, Bill PR2, Calgary Heritage Authority Amendment Act 2022, Mr. Nixon.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Klein.
Excellent. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to rise today to move third reading of PR2, Calgary Carriage Authority Amendment Act. One thing I really appreciate about Heritage Calgary is that they maintain the sites in its inventory, but in some cases find a way to come up with new and creative uses for some of these facilities. And I just wanted to share a quick story about how a church that was built in 1911 made the decision to use their building to provide shelter and food for the homeless. Many years later, they took in a 15-year-old boy who went on to found an organization that impacted thousands of people. That organization eventually outgrew that church and moved to another heritage site, the Electric Warehouse, which was used to help thousands more. Most of us could not imagine Calgary without the mustard seed, and would lament the loss of these structures on our landscape. These buildings are not just part of our past, but they're also part of our future and who we are as a people. The preservation and celebration of our past builds a future and a culture for our children. As I previously spoke to this bill, I didn't want to talk too long on it, but wanted to give this one example of the importance of preserving these historical buildings. And with that, I will sit down.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Buffalo.
Thank you. Certainly want to support Private Member's Bill number 2. Also conscious that there are many other structures in Calgary where the Calgary Heritage Authority, now going to be called Heritage Calgary, I think, have taken issue with and want to see preserved and have met with resistance. They try and negotiate as best possible to save as much as they can. One of those buildings, older structures, is the Calgary Brewery site in Inglewood, where there is a rather large development planned for, and hopefully some of it will be saved for the future generations to understand what the industrial landscape looked like in Calgary in the 1900s, early 1900s. But with this private bill before us, number 2, certainly want to say that the members of the opposition support.
Are there others wishing to speak? Seeing none, would the Honourable Member for Calgary-Klein like to close debate?
Oh, good.
Honourable Members, the Honourable Member for Calgary-Klein has moved third reading of Bill PR2, the Calgary Heritage Authority Amendment Act 2022. Does the Assembly agree to the motion for third reading? All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. That is carried.
Bill PR2, Calgary Heritage Authority Amendment Act 2022 is now read a third time.
The Honourable Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank everyone for their participation tonight. I would argue we have record progress and record speed. But with that, I would move that the Assembly be adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, which would be Thursday, May 26th, 2022.
Having heard that motion, all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. That is carried. The House stands adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. Order.